Hey, Tom Bartels from growfoodwell.com, and I'm out in the garden today. It's late September. We're a couple days shy of October, and I just wanted to talk to you briefly about some of the tips about what to do in your autumn garden. So I'm going to walk through the garden and just kind of talk about things as they come to mind. While I'm right here in this carrot bed, I'm going to be letting these carrots grow till the tops really die back, at which point I'll take them all off and mulch the carrots, and I keep them in the bed for the winter, and then I go ahead and harvest them as I need them throughout the winter under the snow. And the only way to really get away with that is to have about a foot and a half of mulch to keep them from freezing. And I have a section on how to do winter carrots on the training page. The dill here is starting to get to its peak. The seed pods on top, the dill seed, is getting dried out. And what happens with dill, it kind of self-seeds because you're going to knock it around in your garden like this, and there's 100 seeds in the carrot bed, and they'll grow back. They're really easy to pull out if you don't want them, but they're pretty nice to have around. I've had dill weed all season, which is great in the pickling process. And then now you can go ahead and wait for these seeds to get to maturity and dry out, and you can get dill seed from it. So dill seed is a really nice spice to have around. It's good. It's sort of like caraway seed. It's good in different dishes and in breads. I'm going to go ahead and cut these out in a week or so. I've been collecting some of this dill seed, but I've got plenty of it, so I really don't want too many new dill plants next year, and all this seed will drop here if I don't pull it out before the seeds dry. So that's one thing I'm going to do. And overall, in the next few weeks, I'll be clearing all the old dead vegetable matter in the gardens. You don't want to let this stuff just dry and rot in place, mainly because, well, two reasons. One, it's more helpful to take all this biologic matter and put it through your compost pile or your worm bin and get it really tight and mature as organic matter that then is processed for next year's soil. Secondarily, late season blight and leaves that get molds and disease that will come in and attack your weaker plants as they age is pretty normal, but if you let them die in place, they will transfer and those diseases and allow them a place to overwinter, which you don't want them to do, especially in the case of tomatoes and some squash where you get lots of leaf-borne disease. You don't want that to rot in place because you'll be more prone to that same disease the following years, even if you rotate that crop. So you want to get that stuff out of the garden as it dies out, put it through the compost, and take your compost pile away from the garden, so you don't want to create an overwintering area for pests either that could jeopardize your garden. So that's just one general point. All this is going to be gone in the next few weeks, except for the carrot bed that'll be mulched. So like the corn, which is great compost material, there's so much carbon in corn, which makes it almost more valuable as a compost material than as a food source. And this is flour corn that I use for cornmeal pancakes. So I like to say that I'm growing pancakes over here. I grind my own cornmeal and then use that in cornmeal pancakes. And this was painted mountain corn. It's an heirloom corn. It's beautiful. Anyway, what's left here on the stalks is dried out, and now I'm going to break that up and add it to the compost pile. So I'm going to run around to different beds and kind of talk about different things. So bear with me. We're taking a garden tour. If you'll notice, I still have some pole beans growing here. I've pulled several crops off of this throughout the summer, but I'm leaving this last crop to dry on the vine, and the reason being this is an open pollinated variety that I'm going to use these pods as they dry out as seeds for next year's crop. So it's a really easy way to save seeds. Just let the last bean crop dry out. It'll get completely dry and brown. There's a few down there and over there, and they'll shake. You'll hear the seeds shaking inside the pods. And that's when you want to go ahead and crack them open and dry the seeds further, the beans themselves. So then I usually put them on a plate and dry them in the sun indoors after that to make sure that they're fully dried, and they'll store a little bit more readily that way. You don't want to have beans in a jar with any moisture in them. They'll mold, and so they'll rot. So let them dry on the vine and then pull them off when they're brown, and you can use those next year. That's assuming you're using an open pollinated variety that will give you the true plant the following year. So keep that in mind. Here I am in one of the tomato patches. I've got several. There's about 78 tomato plants this year. And predominantly this year I planted cherry tomatoes. I did a few full-size tomatoes, but mostly cherries. And one of the reasons is the cherry tomatoes are much easier to come to full maturity and come off the vine without rotting or freezing. There is a smaller volume overall, but I find that they're super easy to grow compared to a full-size tomato that may have more tendency to get blossom end rot or be eaten by a squirrel or any number of problems with getting full-size tomatoes to maturity in a short season. They take longer to mature and ripen, and these cherry tomatoes keep coming off in waves, and I just keep harvesting them in waves throughout the fall and making them into salsa or tomato sauce or freezing them in all kinds of ways to keep harvesting and storing the tomatoes throughout the end of the season. So one thing, when you get toward the end of the season, if your tomatoes aren't ripe yet, you want to make sure and pull all the blossoms that are still on the plant so that the plant is not putting any resources towards those new blossoms, because there won't be enough time to create new tomatoes off those blossoms anyway. So you want the plant to concentrate on just ripening the tomatoes that are on the vine right now. So that's one tip to speed things up. So any blossoms you see, just take that whole branch off that has the blossoms on them, and that'll help ripen the tomatoes that are on the vine. Another quick tip on this: if you are coming up against the end of the season and you still have a bunch of green tomatoes, but they're full size, but they're just not ripe yet, you can pull the whole plant and just hang it upside down in your garage and let it dry, and it will incrementally ripen those tomatoes on the vine. And you simply walk out to your freeze protected place like a garage or a basement and pick them as they get ripe. So that's a way to save the entire plant. It's pretty low maintenance if you have the space to go ahead and hang that up upside down. So that's one little tip on tomatoes. And so I'm just going to keep on top of these tomatoes as they ripen. Every few days I come out and pull about 10 pounds more off these tomato plants and use them in all different kinds of ways to make sure I'm staying ahead of it. If you have too many tomatoes and you can't use them, it's best to just freeze them real quick or make them into salsa. You don't want to let them sit on the shelf too long. They'll just crack open and rot. So you want to try to capture that peak nutrition when they're ripe by either drying them, freezing them, canning them, something, but you don't want to leave them out fresh for too long. There is nothing like the flavor of a fresh, ripe tomato off the vine. Cherry tomato or full size, doesn't matter. Homegrown tomatoes are one of the biggest reasons people get into gardening, because they taste it and they realize how great it is and they want to do it themselves at home. So take that tip. If you're struggling with tomatoes, try cherry tomatoes, because they're a lot easier to grow, I find. So this is a cucumber vine that's starting to die back. It's late season, and you'll notice that the cucumbers don't grow as fast. They stunt out. So it's about done for the season. But out of this one fence line from here to that post, about 3 feet tall, I got 20 quart jars of cucumbers. Now these are Marketimore cucumbers. They produce really well in our conditions here in Colorado anyway, and so you just keep pulling them off in waves as they ripen. And pickles are really easy to make. They take about 30 minutes, maybe start to finish, and 3 days in a pickle jar in the fridge and they're ready to go. I made refrigerator pickles for almost all of them because I eat them so fast that it's not worth canning them. It's really unnecessary because we eat them just about as fast as we make them. Anyway, so that gives you a good idea of volume. In a very short run here on this row, it's only about a foot wide and maybe 12 feet long. It produced 20 quart jars of pickles. So keep that in mind. You don't need a lot of space to grow a lot of different varieties. So if you haven't tried cucumbers, they're actually quite easy to grow, and it's really fun to make pickles in the fall, and it's a quick way to use a lot of cucumbers up. So that's what we did here, and it's pretty much done for the year. So I'm going to be pulling this off the fence in a few days and cleaning out all this dying material. Again, you don't want this to die in place. You want to put all this in the compost pile. So that's what's going on with the cucumbers. So here I've got some kale that I cut back about a week and a half ago, and it's already jumping with a lot of leaf growth. And that's something to remember on your more mature plants out here, and your deep greens especially, chard, kale, collards, stuff like that. If you trim it and clean it up, it's got a mature root system that's really ready to continue putting on leaf growth. So give it a chance. Cut it back to 1 or 2 leaves on the top, and you just crop it down to like just a few leaves on the top. And in pretty short order, you'll get a lot of growth on the top, and you'll get another crop in a few weeks of really fast-growing leafy vegetation, and that's what you want, especially in the leafy greens category. So I've got this new crop in another week. I'm going to go ahead and cut this again and pack that in the freezer for this winter for stir fries and everything else. And so that's one thing. If you've got some leafy greens that are kind of bundled up and have some dying leaves on them and stuff, and they're just packed in and you didn't get to them in time, and there's maybe some of the older leaves that are dying back, go ahead and trim that whole section of the garden, clean it up, give it a chance late in the season to give you some nice fresh growth. It won't do this if it's still got all these big dying leaves off the back end that is still trying to keep alive. If you chop all that damaged stuff off the bottom and just give it some top growth, it'll go ahead and put some new growth on there for you. So remember that with your kales and collards and your deep greens. So here I've got a cabbage patch. There's 4 relatively mature heads of cabbage that I'm going to pull out of here right now and use for sauerkraut. And if you've never made sauerkraut, it's super easy. It's a great way to store cabbage for longer periods of time. Although cabbage on its own lasts a pretty long time in the refrigerator. So I'm just going to go ahead, and you can either store it in a cool place, or if you have a root cellar, cabbage will last quite a while. If you actually keep the root and put the cabbage in a wet bucket of sand, it'll stay for months in a root cellar. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But I happen to love sauerkraut, so I'm going to go ahead and take these 4 cabbage heads that I have ready right now and make a batch of sauerkraut with it. And fermented foods are really healthy for you. So if you do like sauerkraut and you have some cabbage, go ahead and make up some kraut and keep that in your fridge for several months, and you won't be sorry. It's a really good nutritional boost for you. This is sorghum. It's about 9, some of them are almost 10 feet tall. And this is going to be turned into flour. Right now it's moving from a yellow-green seed head to a brown one, and then eventually as it matures it gets dark red. And when it gets dark red, you know that it's almost ripe. It'll harden in that red stage, and as you see it start to fall off the head, the seed head itself, that's when you want to harvest it, in case you're growing sorghum. Now you might chuckle like, why would I grow sorghum? I like to take at least a portion of the garden each year and do some experimenting. And that's what this is. This year happens to be sorghum. You can pick all kinds of different plants that may or may not work in your particular climate zone, but it's a really interesting thing to try, to bring in plants that you're not used to growing and see what they do in your own garden. Now that presupposes that you've done really good soil prep to allow stuff like this to grow. But once you do and you understand what's happening with the soil food web, you can take just about anything and try to see how it works in your particular environment. In this case, I'll be taking these seed heads out in a few weeks once they all turn dark red and harden, and I'll cut them all off, dry them a little bit more, and I'll grind this into flour. So that'll be an interesting experiment. I'll do a quick video session on that when I do it. Do try that. Experiment with things that you're curious about in your garden so you can come out and see how it's going and try something new each year. Don't just grow the same things. You want to keep adding new things so you keep learning in your garden. If you haven't gotten to that level yet, and some of this stuff seems a little bit outside of what's happening in your garden, go ahead and put your email on the email sign up that's here on growfoodwell.com on the right side of the page, so that you can get in on some of the workshops I'm doing this winter. I'll be doing lots of short workshops on all the different fundamentals that allow my garden to have this kind of vibrance and this kind of diversity in a small space. So if you're interested in learning how to make that easier on yourself and get more success and less failure, go ahead and put your email on there and we'll get you signed up. You won't see it on YouTube. It's only going to be announced to the people on the email list, so it's a good reason to not just sign up on YouTube, but get on the email list, because it's only for the internal list that I send those workshops out. Okay, thanks for joining me. I'm Tom Bartels on growfoodwell.com.